Okay, hello. I'd like to welcome everyone to this high-level roundtable on artificial intelligence. The theme we'll be discussing here today is, I think, one of the most important ones flying around in this debate, even if it's not always the one that gets the most amount of attention. And that's basically, how do we regulate innovation and how do we innovate regulation? I think we're going to talk, of course, about the risks and the problems with AI. That's very important. None of us want AI that isn't safe. But we're also going to talk about how we can create an environment where everyone is safe and the technology and all of the companies that will grow around it and all of the wonderful life-enhancing things that it will bring to us can take shape as well. It's not an easy balance to find, but if there are people in the world who can find it, some of them I do believe are on this call today, and we very much look forward to hearing from them in a moment. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Paul Hopheins. I'm the president and co-founder of the Lisbon Council, and I have the honor of being your host for the remainder of this session today. Look, we're going to let Axel Voss go first. Axel, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here with us. For those of you who don't know Axel, he is a lawyer from Rhineland in Germany and a member of the European Parliament, for what, 13 years now, since 2009. He was, of course, very famously the rapporteur on GDPR, and he has, I think, a lot of things to say about where GDPR may need to go now. But that's not what we're going to talk about today, though you're welcome to come in on that point. He's also, I think, the rapporteur of no less than 3 reports in the European Parliament on AI, and has very much become the centerpiece of this debate and this discussion going forward as we look for a compromise, look for ways to bring all political parties, all interests, all citizens along on a piece of legislation that is frankly like GDPR. GDPR, groundbreaking. No one has done this before. The European legislation will be the first. And that poses certain challenges and it poses certain responsibilities as well. After Axel, we're going to hear from Andy Wyckoff and Alexander Ebert and Will Carter as well, so I'll get to you in a moment. But Axel, let me pass the floor over to you, and if I may, I'm going to throw in 2 quick questions. First one, the obvious one, how do we get that elusive balance I mentioned a moment ago? What do you see in the European Commission's proposal that you like? What don't you like? And how can we work to make this work? And I guess, well, really, that is the only question. There's not a second one beyond that. But maybe you could tell us a little bit about the legislative process going forward, which is a little bit mysterious to those of us who don't work inside the European Parliament. We know the schedule and we know a bit about it. But how will this process unfold going forward? And let me say it's an honor and a pleasure to have you with us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Paul, and let me also thank to your invitation and also the possibility to discuss all with you, and it's so nice to see you. So I suffered a little bit of this COVID virus right now, so that's why I'm quite happy that I can be part of it, and I'm also very happy also to see Alexandra once again. So thanks a lot that every one of you is attending. So of course today let me start with a kind of a short overview regarding AI. We have voted today, and it was a kind of a success today also in having voted on this report, and this is giving you kind of or it should give you kind of an idea how we should proceed in the EU. So it's not only that we were focusing on some of these elements like sustainability, competition, workers' market, health, and so on. We also try to demand for more concentration also as a kind of a strategy to the European Union, that we have to take AI seriously, and with that AI is a kind of a booster to the digitalization and has such a strict and strategic relevance for all of us, so that we should try to focus, and that we should also take somehow the lead, even if it seems not very likely right now, but we should take the lead in also in this development of AI. What we are saying also is that we should more be unified in transforming these to have a kind of a real digital market here, and not fragmenting ourselves once again because of some of these elements might be the competences of the member states. We would like to see better or improved laws instead of coming all the time with new elements of it. And also what we need, of course, this is very obvious, the access to data. And this is one element extremely important. Without data, you won't have AI, and and without AI, probably you do not will succeed in the digitalization. So that's why we need to focus on this, that we are minimizing the hurdles for accessing of data, and that we are also trying to have a kind of a fair situation in the market. And this is what we are trying to formulate there in this report. And I hope that the Parliament, that the Commission, and also the Council will take this seriously, that this has also kind of an impact to the European development. Otherwise, I do not see a kind of a real political will, a real strategy, a real priorities to the European Union in coming forward. And this is what we are missing, and this is what we are asking for. So, of course, the AI regulation in this aspect plays also a kind of a certain role, and what we should avoid is a little bit that this instrument will become a kind of a second GDPR in this complexity, and that no one is really understanding, and this is just for lawyers something to explain. And this is what I would have in mind, to create something what is practical. Although we are dealing with ethical aspects or the impact of fundamental rights and so on, but at the end, this should lead to a kind of a practical guideline for everyone who is developing AI. What I really like in this proposal is the idea of sandboxes. Because we have to solve somehow this controversial situation where we, on the one hand side, saying in the GDPR, please do not use personal data, and we won't provide, and you can't process. And on the other hand, we are asking in the AI Act at the end for kind of a result of AI developments, where this is non-biased and non-discriminatory and gender balanced and so on. But if we are not providing these quality data then for training your algorithms, we are out of the game. So this controversial situation has to be solved. And if you have other ideas, this might be very helpful and very welcome. But so far, I see the sandboxes as a kind of a solution where we can handle this training of algorithms in a way better than probably today. The idea and also what I like is the kind of starting point that we are trying to regulate AI, but also this should not have the impact or the effect that we are making this so strict that nothing is possible at the end. So we need to be more open. We need to concentrate on what is really practical. So a risk-based approach here in this regard is something what I definitely support. But once again, if we are using the risk-based approach in a way how we are doing these in the GDPR, so the handling by the data protection authorities, then this is a lost case. So we have really to underline the risk-based approach, and this should really a kind of focusing of risks instead of something else what might happen in the world if you're using this or that. So concentrating on this one. What I do not like really is to pick out one of these technology like facial recognition. Of course, we know the goods and bad things about facial recognition, but with privacy tech, you can also accompany these and use it still instead of banning this whole issue. So I'm not a friend of picking out one technology, especially when you're not knowing what business models might be built upon these technologies. So that's why we have to, from my point of view, enable everything, but also in this area of biometric data, we have to make sure that kind of the situation of privacy tech is also safeguarding these in a way that your data still protected in a way like the GDPR would like to have it. And one of these big questions, and probably I need also your input here, is how we will proceed with the digital governance of all of these, what we are doing in AI. I'm not really kind of a big fan of a new European AI agency, but if you are thinking this might be the best way forward, then I can be convinced to be a better fan of AI agencies. But it depends a little bit how we are seeing this. We need a kind of a digital governance, but also I would like to see the governance, not how we are seeing these with the data protection authorities only in one way directed. No, we should be more open for extremely more elements and that we are balancing these in the best way forward. What I'm missing a little bit is the question of liability. So we are now regulating here some obligations, but not knowing what liability at the end will be attached to these. So I'm not, this is probably more a kind of a legal aspect of it, but I would like to see liability also answered to this, but not once again in a kind of a strict way. It's more in a way that we are covering kind of a strong liability in a way of high risk elements to it. I'm still asking myself, and I have to discuss these also with the colleagues at the end, should we integrate a kind of a process of anonymization of data? Might this be helpful or not? So we do not have these in the GDPR. It might be helpful to have something like this, but if we are then ending up in a kind of a majority where we are have a kind of a wording what seems non-practical, then probably is having better not something integrated like this. But so far, I would say it might give you all a kind of a guideline in saying how we are anonymizing these, because one of our data protection authorities thinking there are no anonymous data in the world any longer. So that's why probably we need to come forward in saying what is really anonymous. Of course, I'm always interesting to hear, especially from Alexandra. She introduced this to me once of the, now I forgot the name, the data.
Synthetic data.
Synthetic data.
Yeah, synthetic data. This might be also kind of a solution, but I'm not sure if we should add here something like this and more explaining this. But here I probably also need your feedback for this one. And what is for me extremely important is also that we are trying to avoid overlappings. So it might be some kind of overlapping regarding GDPR, e-privacy, data governance Act, or the Data Act now, or the Cybersecurity Act. But here, once again, probably I need the input of all these practitioners who are dealing with these. I just have a kind of an imagination where we might have some overlaps, but if this is really then true, I need this feedback. What I'm always hearing is the machine regulation for the health devices, the directive, etc. But this is something what we also need to know at the end, and what we have to be strict in a way, what is valid for what situation. What I would like to do, and this is how I presented a bit the report last week. Even I couldn't do it myself because of the COVID situation. But what I try to propose is also that we are coming or trying to come forward in, like the council is doing, to decide on what situation who is responsible. If this is the user, if this is the manufacturer, the producer, the deployer, or whatever. So this, from my point of view, should be more clear. And at least I think we can still work on a kind of a more conceptual approach on trustworthy AI. So it might be helpful also to be more detailed here and not leave this to some interpretation at the end where we will be surprised what the outcome might be. The definition of AI in Article 3, I would like to see this more reduced in a way to machine learning, so that the scope, that the scope is not too broad, and that we are really focusing on these AI systems who are doing their learning in a kind of an self-produced way, and that we are not focusing on something what is more more static, so that we can more concentrate on this. I think this is a kind of an overview how I would like to see this. I know there's a lot to discuss also with the colleagues. I hope they will be open for this more conceptual approach on these. Of course, one important element, and here I hope I will have a kind of a better approach, or a correct approach on these, is how we are defining, or not defining, but how we are acting on high risk. Probably we do not need a kind of a definition, but we probably need a more concrete description what we are understanding with high risk. And here, so this idea so far is more that I would say we need to have a kind of a critical use in an environment where it might be critical, and this critical area. So the critical intention of or intended use and the critical area, and both together should lead to a kind of a high risk situation. And just to avoid, and trying to give always this example, if you have an AI system working in a kind of a high risk environment, infrastructure or so, not every AI system is, because of this, a kind of an AI high risk system. And so therefore we should need, or we should come to a distinction between real high risk elements and AI systems who are definitely not really kind of a high risk to whatever this means. What risk do we mean? So this is something what I consider as most important to reduce the scope a bit, and then we can think about should we have this kind of self-regulation or third-party certification or whatever. But if you're broadening the scope, I can't see that we do have such a lot experts around. They can evaluate everything. So I have in mind what my colleague Brando Benify was saying, that he's not a friend of these self-declaration certification issues. And but I think it depends also a little bit how we are seeing the definition, how broad this might be, and so on. And then we can think about these third-party certificates. But this is one idea at the end, where I would say we need probably to describe more strictly what do we mean with high risk, what is affected, and what do we mean the risk of what. So this probably needs to be described. And so thanks for your attention. I hope, although I have COVID in my body, I could explain myself still in a way that you might follow. And thanks a lot for your attention here.
Excellent. Actually, you were absolutely superb. And I have to say you deserve an award for hanging in there and coming. It's a sign of your dedication to getting this legislation right and your commitment to Europe, which we all knew, but it's on display today. Look, I think normally I would weigh in now with a question, and I do have a question, but if there's time, I may save it for later. And instead, I'm going to pass the floor back to you. And what do I mean by that? How can we help? There's a lot of experts on this call. What are some of the open questions in your mind? You've just taken us through quite a few of them, but in 2 or 3 words or less, or 2 or 3 questions or less, what are the questions you would like to put to this group in a way that we could possibly help you?
Yeah, so at first, for me, the most important part is how can we describe or how can we evaluate high risk better, if you have there some ideas, if this is the way forward with critical use and critical area. The other question, of course, is, but this is more technically, this overlapping and also this question of processing or describing the process of anonymization of data. This might be also something, but this here we will come to a kind of an result. But probably the most important part, and this is where I'm not really clear enough, how is, let's say, fundamental rights, ethical standards, and criteria for high risk, how this is linked, and how we can come to a kind of a solution that this is not something where everyone is desperate at the end and has a kind of a guideline. So this sometimes the fundamental right, ethical aspects and criteria for describing the high risk situation, this might be something what needs to be clarified also in the text. Because I do not think my colleagues will have a kind of a clear vision. They will like to add something more and more to ethical standards, and probably we will get this whole wish list here. But how can we deal with these in a practical way forward? Sorry for being so long.
No, that's an absolutely perfect segue, and thank you for making my job so easy. I can just kick back and listen for the rest of this discussion. It's also a perfect segue to Andy Wyckoff. Andy, for those of you who don't know him, is Director of Science, Technology, and Innovation at the OECD. He is a very, very nice guy whom I've known for many years, and also a very important guy. He is all of those things. Andy, it's a pleasure to have you with us here. I was hoping maybe, of course, you could tell us a little bit about the OECD AI guidelines, which are now, of course, the G20 guidelines. They've been rebranded, but in a way that I know that you're quite happy and proud of. What role do they play in this discussion? And we'd also like to hear a bit about your work going forward, the classification system that you're working on and what role that might play as we move towards what will surely be the world's first AI legislation, which will no doubt be copied and imitated in many places around the world. Andy?
So Paul, thank you so much for that nice introduction. It's great to be here this afternoon, morning for some of you. And yeah, Paul, you set that one up very nicely. Axel's ending statement about the need to link ethical solutions to risk assessment is exactly where we're trying to go. So in the true tradition of the OECD, I have a PowerPoint, which may make it easier for me to convey some of these ideas quickly. So if we could just immediately go to the next slide. I want to remind people about these OECD AI principles that were adopted by what is now 38 member countries at the OECD in 2019, but then 6 other non-member countries joined on, and including Ukraine, I'm happy to say. And as Paul said, these then went in to be form the basis for the G20 principles, which did rebrand them, which is fine. And that happened underneath the Japanese presidency in 2019. If you just see the first 5 principles on the left are very much value-based, what we would call human-centric. We avoid the word ethical, not that we're not ethical at the OECD, it's just that it doesn't translate into law. And this is soft law at the OECD. So human-centric was our choice of term. And these apply to all actors. And then on the right-hand side were key actions that we thought that policymakers needed to implement in order to foster an AI ecosystem that can thrive in the long term and benefit societies. Just quickly moving on, because I'm going to get to the classification in a second. If I have the next slide. Now, principles are great, but you need to move from principles to practice. And that's really where we've been lately, is about implementing these principles. We've done it largely through 2 ways. On the right-hand side, we launched what's called the AI Policy Observatory early in 2020. And this is to provide resources for the debate, which is what the OECD is about, particularly data and trends. And if you go to this website, you'll find lots of data that hopefully began to anchor this into evidence. We also do a lot of policy analysis. That's all up on here, and all of the OECD is contributing, from my colleagues in the Health Committee to my colleagues in the Agriculture, are looking at AI in their particular fields. And then we have a database of national AI initiatives from over 60 countries. And the intent here is so that countries can learn from each other. And yes, you're right, Paul and Axel. A lot of people are looking at the EU right now because you are the first mover. And I applaud you for that, because I think it brings a more concrete discussion to my table and probably those of many others. The other thing we did, which is on the right-hand side, is, you know, we like digital policy, but this takes a technical expertise that's beyond most of my delegates and beyond most of the Secretariat. So we convened an expert group with more than 200 different individuals, which really, as you can see from the rainbow down below, represent a wide cross-section of the stakeholder expertise. And we've begun to harness this group into these different groups that you see, one on AI tools and accountability, a new one on AI compute, and one on policy and governance that's now been elevated to a working party at the OECD, which is an official body. Just cognizant of time, I'm going to keep going, but if we go to the next slide, I want to talk really about our work of classifications, which tries to do exactly what Axel was saying, taking the principles now and applying them to a classification framework, which can work to help you get to a risk-based approach. This classification framework went through the formal committee process, the OECD. It was made public just last month. That doesn't mean the work is done by any means. We're just starting. And as we all have been talking about today, we know AI can go from everything from Siri on your phone to cancer diagnosis to driverless cars. And all these raise very different benefits and challenges. But we need to help policymakers understand this to be able to move towards a fully trustworthy AI and a more predictable AI environment. And so our goal here is to develop a framework that can map those principles to AI's technical characteristics to help policy. And hopefully, because our membership covers 3 different continents, to bake in international comparability from the start. So just quickly, because I'm running out of time, if we go to the next slide, I just want to describe to you briefly what the classification system looks like. There are 5 key components. At the core are these principles about people and the planet, but on the left it looks at the context of the AI system. It includes the sector in which the AI system is implemented and how widely it is going to be deployed. Next, it looks at the data and the input that flow from that context to the AI model, including how data is collected, processed, and whether the data is personal or not. A lot of data in the forthcoming future will be largely engineering and other types of data that do not have a high personal component. On the right, you find the AI model itself and the technologies used in it. Here, I might disagree with Axel a little bit. I wouldn't restrict ourselves to machine learning at the moment because you want to be able to provide that predictable environment for other AI, which is quickly changing over time. And even within machine learning, there's supervised, unsupervised, reinforced, all these different models, and that I think we need to have something that is broader. And last, we look at the dimension of where the task and the output that flow from the AI model back to the context and the system that where the AI, how it performs, such as recognition or personalization, and how much autonomy the system has, and so forth and so on. This gets complex. We can map the different dimensions of the framework to different stages of the AI life cycle and help identify some of the key actors that need to be included in terms of accountability and risk measurement. Now, right, this slide I won't go through because of the detail. It is on our website, oecd.ai/classification, and you can find, but again, what we're trying to do is get everyone on the same page in terms of understanding AI and the metrics, providing structured registries or inventories of AI, facilitate sector-specific frameworks, certainly support risk assessment, which we certainly agree in. And here we're building an AI incident tracker, which goes one of Axel's comments. It's about taking what's really happening and feeding it back to the system to recalibrate it and make sure that it's up to date. And we're very much looking at the risk management and accountability across the system. Let me end there, Paul, cognizant of time, but just to say, if you skip to the last couple of slides, we're also building a catalog of tools for trustworthy AI, which we hope to launch by the end of 22. And you can see here it includes things like LinkedIn Fairness Toolkit or Mozilla's open source auditing tool or Microsoft's Interpret ML. We are then going to move on to looking at accountability and audit. And just to end by saying a lot of this is up on our website. It's the last slide with the URL. And thank you for the time. this afternoon. It sounds like our efforts are very much in line with a lot of those of the EU. There's a good reason why the two groups infiltrate each other, but we are also reaching out to, I think, the rest of the world where a lot of the AI development is going on, beyond that occurring in Europe. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Andy. That was fascinating. I'll resist the urge to ask questions and pass the floor over now, if I may, to Alexander Ebert. Alexander, there have been a couple of questions mentioned so far of anonymization and synthetic data. I know and hope that you're going to tell us a bit about that. Maybe you start by telling us what synthetic data is, what mostly AI does, how it might be a solution to some of these problems we're discussing, and of course, we would love to hear from a successful, very impressive startup sitting right in the middle of Europe, what you think about all of this legislative activity and how it can most be written in a way to help companies like yours survive, not just survive, but survive, prosper, and grow. The floor is yours, and thanks for being with us.
Thank you very much, Paul. It's a pleasure to be here today. And also thank you to Axel and to Andy for the input they just provided. So as you asked, synthetic data, I will start with an explanation of synthetic data and why I think it's so important for the efforts we are currently undertaking as the European Union to, on the one hand, become a region where data can freely flow, can be used for innovation, and we might even become the responsible leader for artificial intelligence without risking the privacy of citizens. And then I will also add a few things to what we've heard before. So for those of you who haven't heard of synthetic data, what is it and why is it needed? Think of synthetic data as a new approach to anonymization. We heard Axel saying before that data access is highly important to develop AI systems to ensure that businesses, no matter how large or small they are in a position to innovate with AI and adopt this technology. But of course, whenever we work with personal data, privacy is an issue. And also, as Axel mentioned, some data protection authorities and scientists currently tell us traditional anonymization techniques like masking and obfuscation. Think of these techniques like having a data set and going through this data set with a black pen, trying to remove all the attributes in this data set which you deem to be re-identifying. Those approaches don't work anymore. And that's a big issue because not only are these approaches destructive, think of companies nowadays collecting hundreds, even thousands of data points per customer. And with these approaches, you can only retain 2, 3, maybe 5 attributes before you run in a re-identification risk. But they also not only destroy the utility, as I mentioned, they're easy to re-identify and in fact don't produce anonymous data. And that's exactly the reason why synthetic data was invented a few years ago, or basically a few years ago, AI-generated synthetic data was invented, which helps us to anonymize data in a way where you can preserve all the utility of a data set, but make re-identification impossible. So what is this synthetic data? It's easiest understood if you think of images. NVIDIA a few years back did some research where they trained an algorithm on hundreds of thousands of human faces, up to the point where this deep learning algorithm really understood how a human face looked like, that there are 2 eyes, a nose, a mouth, which is usually that big, which different hairstyles there are, which different skin shades. And then once this training process was completed, which was conducted on real-world celebrity data, for example, on real-world celebrity pictures and human pictures, a completely separate synthetic data set could be created from scratch. And there you had images that are completely realistic. If I would show them to you now, I unfortunately don't have them prepared on my screen, I'm sure everybody will tell me this is a real human on the picture. But it's synthetically generated information that in that shape or form never existed before. And it's a very sophisticated approach where you learn the patterns from the original data to then create them from scratch in a realistic and representative manner. So if you look at these images, the eyes of the people you see are not the eyes taken from person A in the training sample mixed together with the mouth of person B and so on and so forth, but it's really information that's generated from scratch and that's overall realistic and representative. And this is incredibly interesting when we go away from images to structured behavioral data. Think of financial transactions. Think of your mobility patterns, how you're moving around your street. Think of your healthcare information. We all know there's a huge promise with AI when it comes to using this technology to help us with cancer detection, to help us with smart city creation and the impact AI can have on the environment. All of this is based mainly on behavioral data that's derived from humans, and therefore it's highly sensitive and highly personal data. But with synthetic data, you can learn on this original data that we already have and generate a replica of this data where no one-to-one correlation between any real data subject and a synthetic data subject exists. So basically, to give you an example, we did a feasibility study with the Joint Research Centre of the European Commission. They have the cancer data from 50 million European citizens available. But this is only accessible to a privileged group of very few researchers. So the impact this data can have for researchers, but also for data-driven policymaking, is very limited. And they were evaluating our technology to see whether they can use synthetic data to make these 50 million cancer data set openly available in a synthetic form. And this would allow researchers to identify patterns that, for example, lead to cancer, or see whether certain member states have areas of improvement for early cancer detection or with certain surgeries, just based on the data that's available. And this feasibility study was quite successful, and there's a report coming out quite soon. But there are also many other applications for synthetic data. So basically, it's a replica for original data that you can use to train AI algorithms, for open data sharing, to democratize access and create an environment where not only the big tech players, but also researchers, public institutions, and SMEs can access, innovate, and use data to also develop AI algorithms. And it's also technology that's already now being used for data sharing, particularly in the post-TREMS 2 era. So there are quite a few applications. But one other thing that's interesting to understand about synthetic data is the role it plays for trustworthy AI. Synthetic data can allow you to also, in this process of learning patterns from the original data to see how people behave, make sure that you eliminate historical biases. Therefore, you can create fair synthetic data sets that will tremendously help organizations to fulfill the requirements of the AI Act when it comes to not discriminate against certain minority groups. But one aspect I think is even more important, and therefore I want to bring it up in this group here. We already heard it from Axel that one big concern is who can evaluate AI systems, who really has the skills, who can build them. And if we look at the current skill landscape here in Europe, I think it's highly unlikely that in the near future, each small company, each medium enterprise will be in a position to do that. So what we need to make AI something that can be developed responsible, that can fulfill the requirements of the AI Act, is a possibility to have external support with building these AI systems, have external auditors, external people validating your AI algorithm and telling you if you do something different. And there you need data to share, but of course your raw data is privacy sensitive. So synthetic data also has a role in building up, for example, as the UK just trying to do it, AI auditing and AI assurance ecosystem, because you can't only share the models, you can't only share the code, you always need to have representative, realistic data to do that. So I'm stopping here with synthetic data, but I just want to have you all being aware that I think synthetic data is key for us to building the Europe we want to see in the digital space, to make it possible that you can freely innovate with data and with AI while upholding our really high and important privacy standards. And I'm not telling you this because I work for a synthetic data startup. I actually joined the synthetic data startup because I researched GDPR's impact on AI and found that we need to have a solution in this. So I'm stopping here with my comments on synthetic data. And if I have a few more minutes, Paul, then I would make some remarks. 2 minutes, so I'm going quick. Just to what Axel and Andy already said, so I can just second most of the points that were brought up. And I think for the AI Act and for us in Europe to become successful with artificial intelligence, we absolutely need to have a unified AI or digital body, because the discussions were also whether, for example, the EDPB should take up this responsibility. But as Axel mentioned, with the strategic relevance of artificial intelligence, and as you can also see when you read the AIDA report, artificial intelligence is just not a niche topic or a nice to have topic anymore. It has so much impact on our economy, society, security, and even democracy that we need to have a holistic and balanced perspective. Of course, we need data protection, and I'm quoting Axel here again, who always says we don't need 150% data protection, 100% is perfectly sufficient. We need that perspective. We also need societal perspectives, antitrust perspectives, and many more things. And I think we really need to have a smart way in regulating this to make sure all of these that perspectives are balanced for the betterment of society. And I also think that building up access to data, sandboxes, data hubs, and so on and so forth is highly important. I slightly disagree with what Andy said. Of course, with IoT, many of the data points that we will have available in the future will not be purely personal data. But still, if we think of smart home devices or devices attached to our cars or applications, they're still personal data. So I think we need to have synthetic open data readily available to facilitate this data innovation. And then I have about 20 more remarks, but I think we're out of time. So I'm handing back to Paul and looking forward to continuing this discussion in the plenum later.
Okay, thanks. We'll save the 20 more comments for the sequel, if that's okay with you.
Of course.
Back in the old days, a long time ago, when the Lisbon Council used to convene meetings in person, we had something called the Frequent Flyer Award, which went to the guest who had come the longest way to be with us. And we still have it, even though it's online now. And that's my way of introducing Will Carter, who joins us all the way from Mountain View this morning. Will works for Google, a company some of you may have heard of. And he has enormous responsibilities there for responsible AI, both externally in terms of its public affairs work, but also internally, where a very large company has to set standards and monitor them and stick to them all the time. Will, I don't see you on your, oh, there you are. Hi, welcome.
Hello.
The floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Paul, and thanks so much for having me today. It's really a privilege to be with such a wonderful group and really appreciate the previous speaker's comments. I think as a starting point, Google has acknowledged for the last couple of years that AI really is too important not to regulate. The biggest risk, I think, for the world is that we fail to capture AI's benefits. And one of the main reasons for that is potential fears and lack of trust in this technology. So it's really important that we think about how we develop this technology responsibly, ethically, and in a way that facilitates trust and adoption around the world. And because of that, we support Europe's efforts to create a legal framework for safe, responsible, ethical, and trustworthy AI, especially for high-risk use cases. The risk-based approach taken in the AIA is reasonable and proportionate and makes a lot of sense. And many of the requirements in the Act are also in line with Google's existing policies, practices, and our AI principles, which set a high bar. Internally, we take a four-pronged approach to responsible AI. The first step, and really a critical one, is culture and education, making sure that every Googler understands our AI principles, the importance of developing and deploying this technology responsibly, and is equipped to integrate those principles into their day-to-day work. But it's not enough to just tell people to be ethical and be smart. You also have to equip them with the tools, techniques, and infrastructure to implement these principles in their day-to-day work, whether they're PMs, engineers, UX researchers, or any of the many functions across Google. And then we have our governance and processes. And we have a three-layered approach to governance that we've developed internally. Starting within our products themselves, we have dedicated functions like our UX teams, our privacy teams, our safety and security teams, which ensure that our products are aligned with the principles and reflecting both the technological state of the art, but also the best interests of our users. We also have dedicated review and support functions that cut across the company that help us to evaluate tricky cases, to understand how we might tackle new issues that we encounter in the course of our work, and also to make sure that we're applying our principles consistently and scaling the things that we learn in the context of the work we do in product across the company. And then finally, we have a council of senior executives that can take on the really hard cases. For example, cases that impact a wide variety of our products in different ways, or that might set a precedent for how we approach a set of issues as a company. This council of senior executives is really important because you want to make sure that up to the senior levels of a company, all the way up to the CEO and the board, they understand the responsibility that we have as a major developer and deployer of AI systems in the world, and that they're making decisions that cut across the company and really allow us to consistently implement and enforce and act on our AI principles. And the AI Act really reflects a lot of this careful consideration. We think that the approach that Europe is taking, clearly defining high-risk applications, establishing consistent practices and consistent expectations for high-risk AI systems makes a lot of sense, and is positioned to enable trust and really focus our minds on ethical AI. But there are a few areas where I think that the AI Act could benefit from some additional clarity and ensure that Europe is not only supporting trustworthy and responsible AI, but also supporting innovation and competitiveness in the global AI ecosystem. The first is ensuring that the AI Act reflects the real balance of responsibilities between different actors in the value chain. There are a lot of different entities that are involved with many AI systems by the time that they reach the consumer. The developers of the original AI system, the providers under the AI Act, but also often third-party deployers, and then the actions of the users themselves. And it's important that the regulatory framework that's adopted incentivize responsible behavior by all of these actors throughout the value chain, and that the responsibility for addressing the risks that we're trying to manage through the AI Act are allocated to people who can actually effectively manage them. To give you an example, the provider of an AI system may be able to provide facilities for human oversight of an AI system, but ensuring that the appropriate human oversight is put in place, that those human overseers have the appropriate understanding and training, is going to be something that the deployers are going to need to take care of in some cases. In other cases, it'll be important for the user to really understand the system and provide that oversight and ensure that the system is acting as intended and providing benefits while managing risks. The second key piece that I want to touch on is making sure that the AI Act enables continuing innovation and competitiveness in artificial intelligence. One key way to do this is to ensure that pure AI research is protected under the AI Act and not burdened with significant compliance obligations or restrictions. That means the publishing of research papers, of demos and proofs of concept should be clearly exempted from the requirements of the AI Act so that we can allow our researchers to continue to innovate and push the frontier forward and advance the technical state of the art. It's also important that the AI Act protect the open source community, which is a key hub of innovation for the AI ecosystem and a key way that we actually disseminate the learnings and advances in the AI ecosystem to others around the world. And finally, MEP Voss mentioned this earlier, it's important that Europe create a unified market, minimize barriers across member states, but also ensure that there is some degree of harmonization and alignment with AI regulatory regimes being developed in other parts of the world. The AI ecosystem is global. Many projects touch on dozens of researchers and dozens of developers across many countries. Many services are provided in many markets, and it's important that that ecosystem be nurtured and supported. Finally, I think it's really important that we make sure that the framework proposed by the AIA is really workable in practice. Certain requirements for high-risk AI systems could be problematic to implement in real-world products. For instance, there's the requirement in the Commission draft that training data be relevant, representative, free of errors, and complete. I think everyone on the call would agree these are certainly attributes we aspire to for our data sets. But the fact is, real world data sets are never going to perfectly meet that bar. And so just making sure that the requirements are written in a way that is feasible to meet and also ensures that we continue to advance our ability to accomplish these goals as best we can and improve our ability to improve the quality of our data sets and our models. It's also important to remember that there's no one size fits all solution. And that's one of the things that we've learned over the last 3 or 4 years since we implemented our AI principles as a company. We're constantly iterating, we're constantly developing our understanding, developing our practices, developing new tools and capabilities. And we're also figuring out how they apply across the wide range of products and services that Google offers. We don't want this to become a check the box exercise where we lose the really deep commitment to responsibility and ethics that incentivizes everyone throughout the AI value chain to go above and beyond to really serve the user and serve the citizens as best we can and their communities. Finally, I do also want to touch on the point that was made earlier about synthetic data and more generally about privacy enhancing technologies and other responsible AI technologies. It's important that requirements that we are putting in place don't preclude the use of those technologies, but actually incentivize us to adopt some of these new techniques and new approaches that can get us greater privacy while also having more effective AI systems, more accurate AI systems, and really capturing all of those benefits. So when you look at a requirement, for example, that training data is accurate and representative and complete, how do you apply that in the world of synthetic data, where the data isn't real? When you look at requirements for logging or for data set disclosure to a regulator or to an overseer, how does that apply to a technology like federated learning or federated analytics, where data is never collated on a centralized server and retained in a way that could be turned over or could be analyzed in a centralized way? And it's also important that we preserve our ability to utilize differential privacy, which intentionally introduces noise, which might be construed as error, into data in order to protect our users' privacy and prevent people from being able to understand what was in a training data set for AI systems. And just to give you another example that's outside of the data realm, when we think about requirements for explainability, traceability, and transparency, or for human oversight, we want to make sure that we're not precluding the use of the most cutting-edge techniques, things like deep neural nets that can deliver significant capability gains for users and communities, but are somewhat complex to really pick apart and understand exactly how all of the inputs led to specific outputs. So throughout, as we're thinking about this going forward, I think, just those really key 3 themes are important. Making sure that all the entities in the value chain are accurately reflected in the regulation, that responsible behavior is incentivized for all those actors throughout the value chain, and that that risks can be effectively managed by the entities responsible for them. Also supporting innovation by ensuring that research and open source software are protected, and also that Europe is creating a unified market and creating a harmonized regime that's aligned with the rest of the world, including leveraging international consensus standards. And finally, that the requirements that we're putting in place be practical and implementable in real-world products, and don't preclude the use of the most advanced technologies and of techniques that can provide significant benefits to our users, for example, through the use of privacy-enhancing technologies. So with that, I'll turn it back over for questions, and looking forward to a great discussion with the rest of the group.
Okay, thank you, Will. Thank you so much. And thanks for being with us across such an enormous distance, even if technology makes it a lot easier than it used to be. I hope you could come visit us in the Lisbon Council in person sometime. Look, I'm going to use the floor briefly and put the first question, but I'd first of all like to put everyone on notice. Please weigh in. We'd love to hear from you. You can raise your hand virtually or put a question in chat, and I will call on you to ask it in a moment. But let me go first. Let me say right away, Axel, you're off the hook. I want to go back to your very first question, because I didn't hear any of our speakers answer it, and I'd like to put it to them directly, and then maybe we come back to you again. Your very first question, how do we evaluate high risk? What does high risk mean in this situation, and how do we judge it, and how do we evaluate it? And Andy, I'll go to you first, and then Alexandra, and then Will, and then Axel, if you have something to add, we'd be delighted to hear it.
So Paul, we're working on it, and it's that classification, those 4 different stages of the classification that we would put forward as a way to think about high risk, because each of them involves a different risk component. The type of data, the type of model, how it's being used, the sector, and so forth. And so to me, this is, and you're going to see different countries come out with different approaches to what they think is high risk. And this is where we're trying to go, because we're trying to make sure that a technology that's inherently global, we can get some interoperability up front, rather than trying to bake it in at the end, which is what I spend a lot of my time on right now. Thanks.
Yeah, okay, good. Thanks, Alexandra.
I mean, I can only second that it, of course, would be highly beneficial to agree on criteria beforehand. Maybe we don't necessarily need to become super granular, because AI is just an emerging technology that is possible to be applied in so many different scenarios and contexts. And these, of course, will always matter and change. And we all know these examples of AI technology being able to be applied in, I don't know, HR applicant screening scenario, which is higher risk than reading out a menu or something like that. So I think in general, listing out which risks we want AI or high-risk AI systems to avoid and what this would mean in different contexts is already a good way to start. But I don't think we need to become extremely granular or even automate this kind of risk evaluation process, because having a clear guideline and outcome on in which direction it should go, and then creating frameworks that help people to evaluate it and start thinking about how these risks can be mitigated, I think is already a very good starting point. And then, of course, I think iteration is expected to happen in the coming years when we get more used to AI in a broader application.
Okay, thank you, Will.
Thanks. I agree wholeheartedly with the other speakers. I think the other piece that I would add is, our experience has been that it's really important to look at the intersection of the technology and the use case or application to really understand risk. It is very difficult, and I think can be misleading to try to apply risk at the sectoral or the broad technology level when there are radically different deployments of very similar technologies. Machine vision, for example, has a wide range of uses. And even if we narrow it down, just to give you a hypothetical example, if you think about the example of the use of biometric ID systems by law enforcement, I think we all agree this is a potentially very high risk set of use cases, but the use of biometric ID systems by law enforcement to authenticate officers to access an evidence vault is very different than the risk of using those technologies in public places to surveil citizens. And so I think just understanding really the use case, the application, the user base, and the technology itself are all really important to take into account when evaluating risk and determining what are really the highest risk technologies and applications that we want to regulate and ensure trustworthy and safe.
Okay, thank you. Axel, would you like to come in on this? How do you evaluate risk, and what do you think of these responses?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if I'm looking to the requirements of high-risk AI systems and the obligations for providers and users of high-risk AI systems. I'm asking really myself, shouldn't we limit the scope of high-risk AI systems? Because if you probably have an AI system working and you don't consider these as high risk, but all of a sudden you are in the kind of definition or the description, then you have a long list of things to fulfill. And this is what I'm asking myself. So if we are coming to this situation and saying, oh yes, AI has to be gender balanced, and then I'm trying to look for some male shoes and AI system is working in the background, then all of a sudden you might be considered as high risk because you are not gender balanced. And this is what I'm meaning. We need to be more concrete, probably, to avoid that really normal, simple AI systems all of a sudden are not in line with one fundamental right or with one ethical aspect or whatever, and all of a sudden you have to fulfill a lot of criteria and bureaucracy to come up with the what we are defining here in the AI Act. So this is what I'm meaning. If we are adding a lot of requirements and obligations, shouldn't it be better to be more precise in saying what is really an AI high-risk system?
Before we move on, would any of our speakers like to take that observation and come back on it? Andy?
I think it maybe will be hard to be, sorry to directly jump in here, I think it maybe will be hard to be super precise just because of this broad applicability of artificial intelligence in so many other use cases. One component that's currently also not necessarily reflected in the AI Act, but which might also be impactful, is thinking of the scale. So if you look in the AI landscape in Europe, many are using AI pre-trained general purpose AI systems provided by big tech players and are not training their AI systems from scratch. So I think it also would make sense that even though there's a shared responsibility and the big tech company can't ensure full compliance with the AI Act because of all the variables that come further down the value chain, that, for example, certain bias requirements or fairness requirements are thoroughly addressed already at that stage, not only because big tech players usually have the knowledge and resources to do so, but also because the general scale of these AI systems being adopted for so many AI use cases, where maybe those will be high risk and the other ones will be lower risk, has just so much impact. So addressing also this early stage of general purpose system and, for example, ensuring that there is sufficient model documentation on which decisions were taken in creating this system that can have impact on fairness, I think is something that we should definitely do because of the scale and the effect that these systems will have throughout the whole AI ecosystem in Europe.
Okay, thank you. We're starting to get some very good questions, and I'll come to those in a moment, but I'm going to keep abusing the microphone, if I may. Just two observations and a question. The observation, Axel, what you were talking about a minute ago just reminded me of the audiovisual directive when we tried to write all of these things down in, when was it, 1999, and all of a sudden we were dealing with a list of prescribed practices that made no sense 15 years later. And by the way, had gaping holes in it too, because things had happened that we hadn't understood at the time we tried to write a concrete list. And Will, I was struck by what you said. I wanted to give maybe an analog analogy about use cases and the question of how AI is used as being very important in how we assess what is high risk and what isn't. The analogy I always make is about shouting fire in the theater. If you shout fire in a theater and your intention is to start a riot and you do, that's a crime. But if there's a fire in the theater and you don't shout fire, well, that's unethical as well. So I think you're absolutely right. We do need to find a way of thinking about the way this technology is used, and maybe not simply to regulate it through a set of practices that just ban things outright with no understanding of the other side of the equation here, which actually leads to my question. Axel, you had asked about the need for an agency, and I think, Alexandra, you talked about it too. Do we need an AI agency? And before I put the question to you, I just wanted to point out I have this lovely article from the Federal Trade Commission in the US, which is essentially asserting the proposition that AI can be regulated and regulated well with existing law. We have laws against discrimination. We have laws that that require companies to tell the truth when they're approaching consumers. And the FTC is writing to companies right now, not just blogs like the one I have here, but they're sending letters out to the people they regulate saying we intend to use these laws to regulate your use of AI. In fact, their exact words, I thought this was very funny. They said, hold yourself accountable or be ready for the FTC to do it for you. My question is, do we need an agency, an additional agency, to enforce some of these things? And actually, I've said too much. Who'd like to come back on this one? Will, do you want to go first? You look queasy.
Sure. Yeah, happy to touch on this a bit. I think that one thing that we've learned in the course of our work is that it's really important to have oversight by people who are close to the use case, close to the sector,
Right.
who understand the context in which AI is being deployed. And so one thing that I think is important to take into account when considering having a new agency that would have a horizontal mandate is whether they actually can effectively leverage expertise in the specific sectors and the specific context in which these technologies are being deployed. Just to give a concrete Google example, as we've been implementing our governance structure across the company, we've recognized that some of our products, because of the specific type of business that those units are in, they carry very different risks and very different potential opportunities and very different considerations from a responsible AI perspective from our other products. And so we've actually created, in addition to our centralized AI principles review body, we've created dedicated bodies to oversee our businesses in health, hardware, and enterprise services. And I think that just reflects what we've realized, which is that having one horizontal body that's trying to capture all of the risks and considerations in the AI ecosystem is really challenging. And in many cases, it may be better to have sectoral regulators who really deeply understand the business and the sector that they oversee and can understand how AI fits into business processes and workflows and customer interactions within their sector in greater depth. And they may be able to more effectively manage risk than a regulator who's taking a really high level view and trying to capture all of the variety and diversity of the AI ecosystem under one umbrella.
Okay, thanks. Andy, do you want to come in on this point?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, Paul. Don't know if I have a quick answer for you, other than, I welcome the experimentation and seeing what works and what doesn't. The one weakness I find with taking the use case or sectoral approach that Will just said, yeah, okay, they know the insurance agency or they know railroads or whatever, but they may not know AI, and getting that technical expertise into all those different regulatory bodies could be a really hard thing. And I'm worried that they're gonna either stifle the innovation that could occur or of not understand something and people could get hurt. So I'm sorry, I'm a two-handed policy guy on this one.
I thought you were going to talk about how similar what Will was saying to the U.S. approach on privacy, where they have essentially a sectoral approach, very strict in some areas.
Yeah, no, you and I have talked about that. I think a lot of people don't understand how strict that can be in the U.S. for certain very narrow areas. But I also know that they're moving on
financial services, health, and a few others.
Education, yes.
Education, yeah.
Maybe also to add here, I think that Will made a very valuable suggestion, but also based on what Andy said, I think maybe the way to go would be the other way around, that we have the horizontal regulator who can draw from the expertise of sectoral experts, because if we do it differently, I think, as Andy pointed out, we will bleed out from a capacity and knowledge point of view. And I think to make it work, we really have to have a strong expertise in this, for example, European level-based regulator, GovTech, that helps them to automate some of the regulatory aspects. And then, as I highlighted earlier, this balanced view of not only data protection, not only different other interests, but really balancing AI. And since you also posed the question whether we need new regulation on AI, I think that the AI Act is underway is a very important aspect. For example, I work a lot with fairness researchers and fairness practitioners, and both in the European Union, but also in the United States, the current anti-discrimination laws we have when applied to AI fairness in certain areas have the complete opposite effect of what's intended by the regulator. So, for example, the aspect in the AI Act that you need to have access to sensitive attributes to make sure that your system is fair is highly important, and I think is needed because there's some peculiarities of AI which are not adequately covered in existing regulation.
Okay, good. Thank you. We're going to take some questions from the audience. And if you don't mind, I want to take 3 or 4 of them, and then we'll come back to everyone for concluding remarks. Luis Cabral, you've been waiting for a few minutes there in the waiting room. Would you like to turn your camera on and ask your question? Is he still here? Grace? Luis?
Yes, he's here. Yes, and I've just unmuted him.
Okay, thanks.
Yes.
And I'm going to go to Mike Nelson next, by the way. Mike, stand by. Thanks.
Sorry, my question is kind of a broad question. I hear a lot of concerns about privacy, and I hear a lot about all sorts of initiatives protecting privacy. But it seems to me, at least putting my economist hat on, that privacy comes with a cost. I mean, synthetic data is very good, but it's not the same quality as original data. And I believe there are many benefits from having individualized data that may be lost in the process of anonymization of data. So while I understand that are very high risk cases, I'm just fearful that this top push, it's largely a top push wave of privacy protection may lead to the oversupply of privacy protection. So just a bit.
Thanks, Luis. I'm sorry, I neglected my duties here. Can you introduce yourself briefly?
Oh, sorry. I'm a professor of economics at New York University, and I'm interested in issues of the digital economy, broadly speaking, and competition policy.
Okay, thanks. I'd like to call on Mike Nelson. Mike, it's an honor and a pleasure to have you with us here. For those of you who don't know Mike, Mike actually did invent the internet. I'll let him explain. Mike, would you like to unmute and turn on your camera and join the meeting?
Thank you very much, Paul. And the real fact, as Andy knows, is that Andy and I helped Al Gore commercialize the internet back in the 80s when we were both working on Capitol Hill. But I had a pretty simple question, which is how in the heck are we going to identify what is and is not artificial intelligence? The term is 65 years old. There are 7 different definitions. I think Axel has it right in saying you can focus on machine learning, which probably can be defined. But it seems to me if I was a company and I was worried about AI regulation, I would just declare that my software isn't AI and challenge the government to prove that my software is AI. The definitions are all so fuzzy, it makes no sense to me to try to do it. It makes more sense to look at the whole range of software, since a bad spreadsheet, a bad statistics package can do as much damage as evil AI, particularly if you get bad data. Anyway, enough of that screed.
Okay, thanks. We're gonna take a couple more. Olga Novitska, would you like to unmute yourself, turn on your camera, and join the discussion?
Sure. Thank you so much. And thank you to all the panelists for a very interesting discussion. I had a specific question to Mr. Voss, and thank you so much for all your work in this space and for your report on AI Act. I represent Workday. We're active in the HR space. So these are the provisions that are of most interest to us, and we definitely appreciate the targeted approach presented in the report. But I was wondering if you could share any initial reactions and any discussions you might have had with other groups with regarding to employment in the AI Act. Thank you.
Okay, good. I hope you guys are keeping notes here, and I apologize for this. I'm trying to get to everyone before we run out of time in a moment. Bron Rumer, would you like to join the discussion, and could you introduce yourself, please? Hello? Grace, is he there?
Yes, he's there, and I've unmuted him.
Bron, would you like to join?
Yes, of course. Thank you for these lovely talks. My name is Bram. I'm representing the Dutch House of Education and Research here in Brussels. And actually, I was wondering, because I heard Will and Alexandra both touching upon the public not knowing enough, still not enough about AI, and that is a problem which is constantly coming back. So I was wondering, how are we going to build this this knowledge? Because it seems that we also need to inform and educate the public more about AI to build trust. And I'm really curious about how the experts think that we should do that, how we should incorporate that in, for example, education or even higher education.
Yeah, I'm just listening to these questions. I'm wondering whose idea was it to treat all of this in 90 minutes, but we're going to we're going to do our best. John Higgins, it's also an honor and a pleasure to have you with us too. Would you like to unmute and ask a question?
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Paul. To Mike's point, during my year as president of the UK's Chartered Institute for IT, I helped our AI group celebrate its 50th birthday, which was quite a surprise to me, quite something. Listen, one of the groups I chair, the Global Digital Foundation, is planning to form something called an AI Assurance Club. Maybe not the most exciting club you've ever been invited to, and I'm not inviting you, but the rationale for it is unlike, I think, Axel, unlike GDPR, where the sort of landscape around GDPR hasn't really been changing that much. I think the background to the issues that we're trying to deal with in the AI Act are changing a lot. And there are a lot of new developments. So, for instance, we saw the NIST report this week. I think it's a couple of weeks ago when the guys from Meta came up with their idea of something called system cards, where it's a new technology to describe how you actually can provide some sort of underlying technology that helps you with the transparency of AI. So there are lots of new things going on, like Alexandra's just been telling us about synthetic data. I mean, that maybe not that new, but it's, these new concepts. So my question really, Axel, something for you to maybe think about is, just as Andrew's got the sort of expert committees going very well in OECD, and the Commission did with its high-level group to some extent, what are you going to be able to do in the Parliament and its committees to be able to tap into the expertise, to keep abreast of what's going on? Because I don't think it is going to be like GDPR. I think there's going to be new things coming out every couple of weeks with new technologies or new insights or new ways of approaching things that help us deal with some of the things that we hope providers and users will be asked to comply with in the AI Act.
Okay, thanks. We're going to take one last question from Ilias Kastritis, and then I'll come back to my speakers, and we'll try to wrap this up more or less on time. Ilias, would you like to unmute and join the session? Grace, is he there?
Yes, he's there and he's unmuted.
Okay.
Yeah, perhaps we could go to the next question.
No, that's the last one. Okay, Elias, I'm afraid you're going to have to submit your question in writing at a later date. I'm going to come back now to our very distinguished speakers. And first of all, thank you all for being so generous with your time and your wisdom in these very busy days. We'll go to Axel first. You've gotten a whole pile of questions. I hope you were keeping track of them because it was all going a little too fast for me, but I'm sure you heard the ones directed at you. And if you could take those, and I'm going to add one. And my question is, how can we help?
I try to focus on these both questions. At first, Olga, we haven't discussed so far the concrete aspects of an AI Act because I was preparing the report, but there is no exchange of views internally regarding the shadow rapporteurs. So I do not know what other aspects might play a role from the different political parties. In the AIDA report, of course, we have discussed the whole situation there, but of course, it's hard to predict how in which direction this will go at the end. regarding this question on high-level group and just tapping in. So it's always good to have these experts around, John, but the problem is if you're creating a legal text, then you have probably considered different issues because of our rule of law system and the trying to make this very clear, and you can't really rely on ethical aspects as a kind of a real criteria for practical issues in describing these, like experts groups somehow are doing these. So for me as a lawyer, sometimes it's difficult then just to take over what the high-level expert group was saying. So of course, what we are doing right now is to give it a try with the AI Act, probably not being such an expert in every little detail where we should also might focus on, but we are trying to come forward and hoping that we avoiding problems, at least if you are trying to use the law later on and not leaving too much legal uncertainty. And this is how we are trying to approach these. And this is somehow in a way critical, because if the Commission is just saying, just to give you an example, I'm sorry for this long statement, and saying, oh yes, if we're concentrating on risk, fundamental rights should be a kind of a balance here, and so. But then you are sitting there, and if you're looking to all fundamental rights in the European Charter of Fundamental Rights, all of a sudden every single AI system might have an aspect of interfering with a kind of a fundamental right, but we can't let it go in saying every AI system is a high-risk system because of this. And this is why I need to, or I try to be, to focus more on what risk do we really mean. And here, of course, I can refer to data protection or ethical aspects or whatever, but how we can do this in a practical way forward, and especially legal certain. And this is a kind of a big problem. I hope I got your questions right, but this was the two who addresses this to me. Paul, you're muted.
I'm sorry, I said you missed my question, which is how can we help?
Yes, of course. What I need is a kind of use cases that we can have a kind of check and balances, and especially on these questions with the high risk element in it, and also are there some aspects where we can really focus on what we really mean with high risk, and that is not this buying of shoes, that this all of a sudden is kind of a high risk system. And this is what, and here we need this differentiation, how we can exclude these simple AI systems, legally speaking, and how can we concentrate on this, what is really an aspect for an AI high risk.
Okay, thank you. Now I'll go back to you again, Alexandra. It's been a very wide-ranging and rich discussion. What will you take from this discussion with you, and what would you like to leave with us?
Thank you, Paul. So I'll answer to 3 of the questions that were posed. The first one from Luis on privacy and anonymization. Of course, Luis is absolutely right. Privacy always comes at a cost. But I think that particularly with synthetic data, we are the leaders in behavioral synthetic data. So you can think of this technology as giving you data that is 99% as good as the real data. And in practice, it's already been used by Fortune 100 banks in US and insurances. They really can use it as a replacement. So it's not necessarily a cost. The cost we currently have is more on the regulatory side, that still data protection authorities in Europe burden the use of anonymization and anonymizing data in the first place. So I think we don't need to rewrite GDPR. We don't necessarily, to answer Axel's question, need to add something about anonymization in the AI Act, but we need data protection authorities to incentivize anonymization and make it easier for companies to use, because with technologies like synthetic data and those that Will pointed out earlier, we can have no cost or no huge cost to privacy, uphold our high privacy standards, and still facilitate innovation. I think that's the route to go for the European Union. The question from Bran on education and the skill gap in the public. I mean, of course, we need to have education, but I think it's not feasible to achieve this effort in the matter of the next year. So in parallel to starting education of the general public, what we can do now is have a broader public debate on artificial intelligence that's really tackling the issues that we see now. Still a lot of the public debate and also political discussions, I think Axel knows a lot about this, focus on science fiction and fear of artificial intelligence and fail to consider the risks and also the opportunities that Will pointed out that we have nowadays. And just getting this right, having more media presence, more public debate, I think is an important aspect. Second, we need to have tools and services in place that help organizations and individuals to comply with the AI Act. I talk a lot with practitioners in AI fairness from leading corporates, and they tell me we have plenty of AI experts. They're in this lucky privileged position that they have them at least, but we have so little AI fairness experts. We need to have tools that make fairness easy to achieve for every developer, and I think this holds true for many other areas of artificial intelligence. So having these tools and services, I think, is highly important as a short-term objective. And lastly, John Higgins' question about expert groups. I think for the AI Act, there's a lot of interaction with experts to getting in all these different perspectives. Also, the high-level expert group will be reinitiated, but I think what we urgently need is to have more focused subgroups and specialized groups, which will then help with guidelines and implementations, which not necessarily have to be legal text to avoid the difficulties Axel pointed out, but just because it's such a broad and complex topic that even the high-level expert group won't be sufficient to tackle all of them with the necessary depth and practical application guidelines that we need here in the European Union to really, make the AI Act something that's not only a paper tiger, but something that really can be implemented in practice. So these are my comments to the questions. And in general, I just want to leave this discussion with, I think it's super positive, the direction in which we're going as the European Union, that we have AI regulation, but we are so early with regulation that it will be an iterative process and there will be lots of change and adoption moving forward. But I think overall, the direction is super positive, and I'm happy to see the work that's currently being conducted in the European Council and the European Parliament, particularly by Axel Voss and his team. So thank you very much that I had the pleasure to be here today. It was an honor.
Thank you, Alexandra. Andy?
Yep, Paul, thanks. It's been a fascinating conversation. I want to give kudos to you and your team. Just two quick points. The first is going back to Mike Nelson. He's right, of course. Years ago, we would have called character recognition AI. We don't anymore. It's very much a moving target. I had a conversation with some researchers in the US a couple of weeks ago, and we can see the merging of symbolic AI with statistical AI. And to me, and this may make Mike smile because this is where we first met, I think we need better foresight on this technology and where it's going so that we can prepare policymakers and keep that agile iterative process that Alexander was just talking about. And then I'm so happy to hear about getting away from Hollywood and hype and anecdotes. This makes the discussion very difficult. But that's where we really need to build this incident database that needs to be global, and we pool these incidents so we can get real life case examples of what is going on and what's not. And we're in the process of partnering, collaborating with a lot of other groups to try to do that. But to me, that helps bring the reality check that Axel is asking for, and happy to help the best we can.
Wonderful. Well, we look forward to following up with you on that. Will, would you like to tell us what will you take from this conversation? What would you like to leave with us?
Absolutely. And first off, I want to thank the other speakers and also the Lisbon Council for organizing this fantastic discussion and for having me. I think I want to touch on that point about trust and understanding. I really want to echo Andy's point about the importance of the database and really getting some concrete examples and having a data-driven discussion about what are the actual risks that we see play out in the real world. What are the problems? What are the solutions that people come up with? That's ultimately how we're going to, I think, really address a lot of the actual challenges we face in the technical space and really in the business space as well. But I also think that, you know, I agree we want to get away from Hollywood, but I don't think that we should set the bar that the average citizen is going to fully understand AI to the point that they feel that they have a deep understanding that facilitates trust themselves. You think about so many other industries which are complex or really technical, and you rely on a combination of third-party validators who are trusted, whether that's regulators or just audit companies, technical experts, safety experts. You also rely very importantly on standards. And having clear standards in the AI space is a really important tool as well that can allow the public to say, you know what, this is consistent with the standard that the technical community that have this understanding have agreed on and agree is reasonable and appropriate. And I think that that's another key way to facilitate trust as well. And finally, having some consistent baseline expectations and principles. And this is where regulation comes in, but also where, for example, the OECD AI principles come in. People can have confidence that if we're taking a common approach that everyone is learning from and iterating on, that it makes sense and is addressing risks that they don't fully want to think about for themselves. I don't want to think about all of the risks of all of the applications and products that I use every day. And I do this for a living. And so I think that ultimately is a really important piece. I also wanted to touch very briefly on the point about scope. Completely understand where Mike's coming from. I think part of the question that we have to ask ourselves is, what is the problem that we're trying to solve? Software has been around for decades. Spreadsheets are not something new. So if we think that there have been decades of serious harms arising from spreadsheets that we need to address, that's one question. Another way to look at it is to say that machine learning based techniques and systems that are able to learn and iterate and adapt introduce new risks and interact with human beings and with fundamental rights in a different way. And we should focus on those machine learning systems. So I think that the fact that we're having this conversation around AI regulation at this time, when we're seeing this real advent of new machine learning applications, is indicative of where the focus maybe can start out. But I do think that it's a fundamentally different question to me. Do we look back at the last few decades of our use of software and think that there are really broad kind of generic digital problems that we're trying to solve? Or are we trying to tackle the unique attributes of machine learning and new versions of artificial intelligence and the new and unique challenges that arise from them? And so that I think is another key question. The last thing I did want to touch on, just to echo the points that Alexandra made earlier about privacy, there are always trade-offs, but you look at synthetic data, you look at differential privacy, you look at federated learning and analytics, other technologies and approaches, we're getting better and better at reducing those trade-offs. Federated learning allows significantly greater privacy while allowing our ML models to train on a wide base of user data so that they're really strong, really accurate, and really well tailored to users, just as one example. So I think making sure that we leave room for these technologies and approaches to continue to grow, continue to improve, continue to reduce those trade-offs that we're facing is a huge opportunity to get the most benefits with the least cost. And we need to continue to invest there. And we need to continue to incentivize the development and implementation of those types of techniques and technologies. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. And if you don't mind, I'll just conclude very briefly, if I could. I've enjoyed the heck out of this discussion. This has been really, really fun, in particular the last 10 minutes, because we ended not with a solution, but with a whole bunch of very good questions and almost a roadmap for where to go now. I love this idea that we should look at use cases and incidence databases and real world examples so that we can better define the kinds of things that we're worried about in the area of risk. I think that's a fantastic starting point for an additional discussion and maybe even a little research, which I would love to follow up with some of you on after this call. Look, I have something I like to, the team knows about this, that my favorite thing to hear about a Lisbon Council meeting is it was too short. Because how many meetings do you go to in Brussels where you hear that about? And even more to the point, how many meetings of 100 minutes feel like they were too short? This was very rich, and I can only thank the speakers and all of the people who asked questions for your wonderful input here. Maybe just one more thought that I wanted to say. I love democracy. Let's not take that for granted. We've had a very vivid example recently of what can happen when you lose it. And the commitment that I see from everyone on this call to this technology, to the place where we live, to getting this right, to living in a community, to everyone's voice being heard has been enormous. So let's never forget what we have. Let's celebrate it. Keep making your contributions, and let's keep working together to make this world a better place, to get AI in the place that it needs to be. And on that note, let me thank the speakers, the participants, and in particular you, Axel, who I know you're braving illness and you're working around the clock to get it right. And we look forward to continuing this discussion. Thanks to everybody.
Thank you.